Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. We're excited that you've joined us. We have a really great topic, Secrets of Value Stream Mapping for Future State. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'll serve as your host and moderator. Our webinar is recorded, so we will be sending out an email with links to the webinar recording as well as the slides, so all participants will receive that. We also have 3 Amazon gift cards that we're giving away at the end of the webinar, so stick around to the end and find out who won. Our speakers love questions, so please enter your questions in the questions tab of the GoToWebinar software. So let's move on to our topic, Secrets of Value Stream Mapping for Future State. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you 2 really fantastic speakers. First is Marc Hornbeek, who's Principal Consultant, CEO of Engineering DevOps Consulting. He's also author of a recent book. Got to do my Jimmy impression tonight show. Definitely check it out. I will be putting a link into the chat for everyone who would like to check out Marc's book. Also introduce Jeff Kais, who is Director of Product Marketing with Plutora. So Jeff, I think, are you taking the baton first?
I am, and thanks for the introductions. And you know, if you haven't been on our webinars before, this is kind of a treat. I love having webinars with Marc. He's a longtime consultant with Trace3, been around the block a number of times. So, you know, the goal of this session is kind of peer into some of the experiences he's had as he's been out on his travels consulting with different companies of many different sizes, including very large enterprises. You know, this webinar is the second in a series. We did one previously on the how do you do a current state value stream map and what's the exercise look like, how do you organize it, and how does it work. And the result of that current state value stream mapping session is to move on to the next one. So we're going to do, you know, what does that look like when you start solving some of the problems. We'll have a future one that we do where we look at some use cases of real, you know, this is what happened when we did current state, future state, and so forth. So keep in touch. We'll keep listening to these. We'll give you some more details on what's happening. As a bit of background, I love, Marc, your book. I think it's freaking awesome. You did a great job of laying out, you know, sort of compiling out blueprints and best practices from your journeys of helping people really, how do they engineer DevOps? And that's why Plutora has been a sponsor of your book. It's great. Why does Plutora care about this? Well, you know what? The more you go down the path of engineering DevOps and you want to measure your progress, that's where Plutora fits in. And so it's a great combination of things we've got here. But there's a link here. You can get it. You can get a link at the end. It's just awesome. So great stuff, Marc. You've done great with that.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments. Looking forward to lots of book sales as a result.
Absolutely. Well, so this kind of takes us into where does, you know, value stream management fit into a DevOps transformation? Probably even more specifically, where does value stream mapping fit in a DevOps transformation? How does this tie together?
Yeah, so this, the book actually has, as you mentioned, some sort of big picture diagrams, and the biggest picture diagram is basically this one. It's like a blueprint overall for DevOps and how there are different layers, logical layers involved in DevOps, and also, you know, east-west activities as well. So I see value stream management as kind of at the top layer of an architecture. If you think of DevOps as an architecture, the bottom layer being infrastructure and infrastructure orchestration, and then the middle being, you know, a CI/CD pipeline starting from planning all the way through to operations and, you know, code creation through to deployment. And then, you know, managing a release, there's a release automation layer. And then value stream management is really totally end-to-end management, including planning and operations and everything in between, and even managing the release aspects on top of that. So, you know, I think value stream management in a mature DevOps environment is essential. You really need to, you know, manage the entire end-to-end and, you know, top to bottom set of activities and processes, tools, people included. And I don't know how you really can do it without some form of value stream management capability, right? And certainly not do it efficiently and at speed of the speed of DevOps. So, but the other thing is value stream management can also be used even if you don't have all of those things underneath. It can substitute for components that are missing because it is at that layer, and you can abstract parts of the process and parts of the stages, and orchestrate those at the value stream management layer as well. So that's where I see it fits. The point of value stream management is you're trying to manage a value, and with DevOps, there's kind of like 6 primary values that are being managed that are identified in the State of the DevOps report. The most typical one that people talk about is agility. Things like the lead time between code check-in and deployment would be an example. You may have different definitions of your agility for your organization. Stability is probably, hand in hand with that, and efficiency, quality, security, satisfaction. These are measurable things that the value stream management can, support the metrics for that to make sure you're really getting the value and that the value is going in the right direction depending on what value you're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And value stream mapping is just a portion of this where, as we take people along a journey of getting to DevOps, this is the tool that you use to get there. And that's what we talked about in the webinar before. So, what are we going to go through today? What are we going to learn?
So there's a lot of the things listed here. I mean, what's a future state? What is this future state value stream map? The last webinar we talked about the current state one. So what's really the difference? And how can you use it? Why is it important? In other words, and how do you do it? And what's the expected result when you do it? And I'll also talk about some of the tips, as a consultant that I keep in mind when I'm doing future state value stream mapping, and some of the challenges as well, how to overcome those challenges.
Cool. Okay. Well, then let's kind of dive into it. Let's just dive right in. Okay, we talked last time about a current state value stream map. What is a future state value stream map, and how? Well, let's just start there. I have a bunch of questions for you.
Well, first of all, I would say, is that, as you can see the definition, I don't think there's a standard definition, but this is one I happen to like. A future state value stream map is a projection. In other words, it's a future state of whatever the value stream should look like in order to meet a particular goal. There are lots of books out there on value stream mapping. They have different definitions. There's one at the bottom that I think is currently quite popular that's listed there. But overall, the general idea is that once you have a current state, then you try to figure out, you're trying to, the reason you're doing it is you're trying to improve things. So you have a goal, what you're trying to improve, and the future state value stream map is really a big picture map of what you want that future state to look like. Should point out that there's no such thing as, any one solution. You're really just documenting a value stream map solution, and there can be multiple solutions that meet the goal. Mm-hmm. That's part of the challenge and magic of future state value stream mapping is to pick a solution that works and the one that everybody can accept. There may be lots of factors involved in that, but you can't automate the creation of an optimized value stream map very easily unless you had some sort of really cool simulator. I've never seen anybody have one, but the system does work.
Cool.
It gives you a solution at least.
Well, and so part of this is we're going to start with a current state map. We're going to draw up what the process is now, do the timings, do the calculations. How does this differ than, a process map?
Well, process maps tend to be a little more complex. And at least what I think of as a manufacturing process map. Mm-hmm. They're trying to take into many factors. You're getting closer to what I call a real simulated process. A value stream map is really a big picture. It's almost like a blueprint for your value stream, and that's how I think of it anyway. Mm-hmm. You're really looking at the major parameters, not every single little, minor parameter. There's so many things that go on in every process. If you were to try to document all of that, it would be a lot more complex. And honestly, I think it would undermine the whole value of trying to build a big picture map. The map is really just a guiding map for other details that different people in the cross-functional team will go off and address. And
Mm-hmm.
within each cross-functional team and the individual steps, they're free to implement things in however they see fit, as long as it meets the goals of the value stream map. That's a difference that I see anyway.
Gotcha. So, well, let's move on. So as we look at saying we did a current state, why do we want to do a future state? What do we get out of it?
So, as I said, there are many possible future state maps, or at least there's multiple for any one requirement. Excuse me. So the big picture value stream map really gives you a nice way to share, a visual with the team, which is great for doing comparisons.
Sure.
Within a team setting. These maps are covering many functions, and they're covering lots of cross functions. So it's great to have that big picture that you can visually see and talk about without getting bogged down in details. And then, in general, just to have, once you've agreed on what the solution will be, then just to have that as a visual, so everybody in the organization, even the people that were not participating in the workshop for the value stream map, can see it and relate to it, and see where what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Then using it and applying it, it gives you a pretty clear goalposts and connection points to align your tools and your software delivery system to value stream map. Management tools can map directly onto those goalposts and steps that are identified in the value stream map.
Yeah, we talked about that last time, how, oftentimes knowing what the right thing is to do and getting everybody on board to doing it, those are two very different kind of challenges. And this process of actually walking people through it, although it seems a little bit, cumbersome, actually helps people get all on board, and not only on board, but gets the team, in essence, enlisted in the process. And both of those things are super valuable as you put these things together. Once you have that common goal, it helps the actual, achieving that, especially because what will come out of the value stream future state is when we get done, this is what we're going to achieve. And that's huge. When you can say, hey, we're going to accomplish, shortening the delivery cycle by, X number of days, it's massive. We start to work together a lot better.
I find these workshops really fun. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a team effort to create the value stream, the current state as well as the future state. Although in the future state, there's a lot more emphasis on the expertise of maybe the team leader to come up with solutions, but then everybody gets to contribute to those. I find people get energized in these workshops, and then they tend to buy into the result better than if you just have some expert run off and do it on their own.
Yeah, because it's not being as good. I mean, for sure, you've had some experiences where, a customer example, for example, where you've gone through this and you've seen the results. You want to share one of those stories?
Well, lots of them. I don't know how many value stream map exercises I've gone through by now, but yeah, I mean, there is an example here in this book, or in this webinar, I should say, that the starting point was the team thought they were already doing DevOps and value stream management. When I got on site for the first time with them, they really just showed me a picture of their tool setup and their tool chain, which really was a CI setup. They had this idea that it was sufficient just to create code, check it in, get some tests running, and then deploy it to a deployment environment, and that was all you needed for value stream management. And of course, that's not true. That's only a piece of the puzzle.
Sure.
And it didn't even involve other teams. It was really the dev team. So that's just an example of how, when you start mapping it out and getting more people involved, they all start to buy into the idea and they start contributing, and you get a more complete solution that is actually going to be accepted by the rest of the team as well.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because it's like that is the key. Again, getting the team on board, getting the organization behind it, getting the executive sponsors behind it. That's the purpose here. I mean, yes, you're gonna do all this stuff, but you've got to have that as your foundation. Without it, you're kind of stuck. So with that, let's talk about how how do you do it? So how do you do a future state map? What's the process?
Well, I think the title of the webinar did it use the word magic? I can't remember now,
Yeah.
but I will admit that there's a little bit of magic in the sense that, you know, there's some expertise that is not just generally available, and that's part of it. So determining the stakeholders, getting the right people involved, depending on what the current state value stream map is and what the goal is, they may be slightly different people. You may actually shuffle the team a little bit.
Sure.
For the future state, once you realize what your goal is and know where you're going. I just lost the webinar for some reason.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
You're still here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you see me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I can't see anything at the moment, but I'll talk to it anyway. So, you know, having the right team is the first step.
Screens. Sorry, Mark,
Okay.
to interrupt. We're still seeing Jeff's screens here. So
Okay.
you're okay there. Somebody might have Slack turned on too, by the way. We're getting some notifications in the background or something.
That's not me. Okay, so the first step is identify participants, and really important to identify the right leader, somebody that's been involved in the future state mapping previously for something similar with that level of scope. And then that leader will prepare everybody for for a workshop, tell them what's going to happen, and actually prepare in advance a possible solution, a future state value stream map, at least for discussion in the workshop. What comes out of the workshop may be radically different, although often I find if the leader knows what they're doing, then it's probably just going to be a modification. But you may come up with alternative solutions. There may be pros and cons with different solutions. So that's another difference between current state and future state. Current state, you're really just enumerating what exists, whereas future state, there are possible different future states, and there may be some trade-offs, costs, and various things. And finally, conduct the workshop, get everybody in the same room, not necessarily physical room. Can be the way I do it. You can do it over a network. People don't have to be in the same location at all. Mostly just use PowerPoint.
That's where you kind of put everything is on PowerPoint, where you kind of lay it out there. Yeah.
Yeah. I find that works. A lot of other folks use things like, I don't know, sticky notes and stuff. But if you do that, then of course you're constrained to being in the same physical room. And with modern organizations that are so distributed, I find that's not really good enough. That's my own perspective. And then, during the workshop, capture what people say, do it live. So by the end of the workshop, you've actually got at least a draft of the solution, and then go off and clean up and document the result, clean up and document the analysis of how that future state is going to accomplish the goal of the value stream improvement, whatever the goal is. So those are the 4 steps, basically.
Yep.
Identify participants, prepare, conduct the workshop, and document the result. Once you've done that, you've got at least a proposed solution that's documented that everybody's been able to buy into.
Yeah, and that's the key, because then you're going to end up with a set of work items, and it becomes a project basically to improve the pipeline. Mm-hmm. And when you've got that project, now you're going to move it forward. You're going to get a whole lot of work done, and you can effectively measure the results of that. And all those, we're going to talk about some of those calculations too. We'll talk about some examples of what happens in the process. But in essence, just doing a value stream map for current state isn't getting you there. You do the current state so you can see what you're currently doing, and that's the big discovery moment, the aha, like, oh crap, I didn't realize it sucked that bad. And then you do a future state where you try to suck less. Any advice on how far to take that future state?
Sure. I hear people say, oh, well, let's take an example. Maybe our lead time is from code check-in to deployment is, I don't know, let's say they have 30 days and they want it. And when you ask them, what do you want? They'll say, well, we want it down to 10 minutes. Okay, well, sure. That's such a huge jump. It's not realistic, right? So I generally say, well, don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to go too far. You want the same team involved. And there's a human factor. I generally think about a 6-month horizon, sometimes less. Mm-hmm. But I tend to like to think of 6 months, 4 to 6 months as a event horizon. And what do you think is rational and reasonable to accomplish within that time frame. Again, the leader's experience has a lot to say about that. What is really realistic and reasonable depending on what the goal is.
Sure.
Reducing lead time by more than, I don't know, 50% in 4 to 6 months is tough. You can maybe get it more, but not much more than that, you're probably not being realistic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, let's move on. Let's jump to understanding, how do you pick a leader? What does it look?
Right.
How do you know somebody that can go lead this thing?
So the leader is going to make all the difference, is the truth, right? If you get the wrong leader, you're not going to get as strong a solution. The leader is not only facilitating the meetings and the workshop, but the one that's coming up with at least candidate solutions, and everybody can then, contribute and review it. But so the leader needs to be someone that understands the goal, not necessarily the product, by the way. It's more about the value stream and the process, the people, process, and technologies involved in creating the value. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a person that is an expert in the product. It needs to be somebody that's an expert in value stream mapping and process improvement and things of that nature. So that's something I would point out. Clearly does need to be a facilitator though, good communication skills. Basically someone's done it before. It could be an external consultant, it could be somebody internal that's done it before, but if you're really going to get value out of this process, you need somebody that has that experience.
Yeah. I mean, if it's going to be you on the call, make sure that you can facilitate. I don't think you've got to be the smartest guy in the room, but you just need to be able to look and be able to identify the inefficiencies. That's why when we talk about participants next, you got to make sure you got people in the room that are smart in each area so you can work with them and get, people collaborating on the solution. That's the point. I think there's some real coolness or some benefit of having somebody that's got a little wisdom and seeing these pipelines transform, simply because there's some common bottlenecks. How much inventory you're creating up front, how much, are you spending too much time on inspecting quality afterwards versus building it in up front, and that whole process. So it's important to get the right people here. And if you do need to, phone a friend, do that, because it'll be helpful. And it's not that much time. Because the impact, if you're doing a 3 to 6 month project, you want to make sure you go in the right direction. And especially for the executive sponsorship, when you get the right people to get everybody on the same page, you'll make movement. So, well, that brings us to what about participants? Who's all got to be there, and how do we pitch them on the time that they're going to be doing? Because in essence, this is the core now. We're getting a facilitator is one thing, but now we got to get people there. What do we got to get there?
So here again, there's a little difference between current state and future state. Current state, you want people that kind of know what it is already. It's a little bit easier to find those folks. But with future state, you also want to bring in architects, people that have an opinion about how things should be done, maybe not only the way it is done now, and are open to different solutions, that have a good understanding of, good sense of balance between, the costs versus possibilities. It's easy to say, let's just bring in the most expensive solution because it'll do everything. Well, that may not be the right solution. You may not be able to afford it. So you have to have a sense of balance.
Right.
Also, people that are not politically motivated so much, that you really want to look at the value stream as the point, not your part of the value stream as something to optimize. Really, where are the bottlenecks, and objectively address those bottlenecks rather than just trying to, figure out how to get more funding for your part of the process. So.
Sure, absolutely. What kind of feedback do they typically offer, and what kind of preparation do they need?
Coming into the meeting, everybody seems to have their own opinions that of what it is now and what the solution could be, but it's only through collaborative interaction that you start getting a solution that really will work well with the whole organization.
Sure.
So that's the real participation, is to get people to speak up and participate, and not just take things offline and handle try to do their own solution on the side. To really make sure that you get people to articulate that they're buying in, and If they don't, then it's really up to the facilitator to draw them out, to say, look, we really need your input here. And by the end of it, to get everybody, it might not be 100% consensus, but at least everybody should at least say, yeah, this is a viable solution. It may not be the most optimal solution, that may not even be required,
Sure.
but is it a viable solution that will address the goal in the time frame that's reasonable?
Yep. And likely the participants that are super critical have already done this before. So you won't need to do a lot of prep for them. So, all right, well, let's dive in. Now, let's just get into real life. Tell me about this. We're going to walk through a deep dive of a company. Give me some background. How many dev teams? What was the problem? Give me the background here.
Yeah, so this is a real actual result. I can't name the name of the company, but it's a real live large insurance company. And they have, I think, 6 locations, 1 major center, hundreds of engineers involved, and also a lot of third-party software, legacy systems, and commercial off-the-shelf systems combined together to make basically a ordering system, that online ordering system and back office system for their insurance agents to be able to use as well. So it's a pretty large application. And their basic problem was the releases were taking too long and repeatedly, and also quality wasn't there. A lot of defects being reported and failures by clients, stability issues. And they really didn't even know coming into the session how long their process took. So the current state process did determine that on average, their current state for any release, even a small release, was 45 days. It varied, but that was kind of the average. And they decided that their goal was to get to 10 days within 6 months. And that's the time between lead time and check-in to deployment. That's a pretty aggressive goal. I told them it's an aggressive goal. May not even be, feasible unless you're prepared to make substantial investment for an application this big. But at least the team in the group, the room said, yeah, let's go for this and see what we come up with. So we did a pretty thorough analysis of what that would take, and the company is Fortune 1000 size company. They do have funds and investment capability to do that if they want to direct in this direction.
Well, what's funny is, at first glance, 45 days to 10 days, what's the big deal? And that's the first aha moment of why you do a current state value stream map, right? So this was their current state value stream map, right? And walk us through this. Why was this taking 45 days? And maybe while you're doing that, you can talk about some of the different colors that are here.
Sure. So the green is essentially the process steps that we decided, in the current state are relevant for, for their goal. We determined pretty quickly that their major bottleneck was how they're doing testing. Testing was the major bottleneck in almost every stage. It was the thing that was holding it up. So we pretty much knew that almost immediately. So we really were mapping out their testing process essentially. And we wanted to attack that. We knew that if we could get the testing times down, then we would be able to bring down the whole value stream time. So that's the green, what are the steps? And then the red is what we discovered that are items of most relevance that we're adding to the delays and bottlenecks for testing, and the blue are some of the underlying infrastructure items that related to that. And if you look at the red, numbers, those are the actual numbers that we were given as the time it took today for each of those steps. And
how did they come up with those times?
In some cases, they went offline and came back with measurements. In some cases, it was an estimate. That's one of the problems with current state. You often find that companies don't really have good metrics in place. If they're already, really well metered, then they may have already been addressing this. So this is not unusual at all to find out that they don't really have offhand anyway, excellent metrics. They have to think about it and often go offline and then come back with some estimates. So that's the reality of many of these value stream map exercises. They're not, the accuracy level is questionable, but at least if people can sit in the room, the people that are involved and agree that these are reasonable representations of what they have, then it's a useful exercise.
Yeah. I'm noticing that this isn't, all pretty and neat, like one little box here, the plan, dev, test, and right on through to release. Is that okay?
Well, this is one of the things that the analysis determined, that they're not really they weren't really following a traditional value stream for DevOps. They weren't doing things like integration properly before testing. A lot of the integration testing and functional testing was happening prior to integration. And then integration would occur and a lot of testing, and they'd have to go back and reintegrate. So things were happening a little bit out of order compared to best practice.
Gotcha.
But this is the current state. Yeah. And also there wasn't a lot of parallel activity going on in the planning stage. At the first three stages, the QA and testing elements were not really involved at all. It was somewhat of an afterthought after they decided what the features and changes were going to be. They would at that point involve QA, and it was Dev and QA weren't really talking to each other very much. They had this idea that they shouldn't be, that QA should be totally independent of development, even at the planning stage.
Wow.
Which is kind of not a recommended idea, frankly.
Pretty old school. Yep.
It is, yes. And then the results of development testing were not being shared with QA as a result of that. And then QA was somewhat off on their own, doing their own thing, taking a long time, and not a lot of automation. Very small percentage of tests were automated. The orchestration of the test environment was totally manual. So a lot of delays between stages of just setting up tests and tearing down test environments afterwards, and then executing the tests manually. Not a lot of metrics on testing.
Yep.
Not even really good metrics on how do you know when you're done.
Yep.
That's a popular problem.
Yep.
Testing is a lot more complex than people want to realize. Sometimes there are a lot of facets, and one of them is, hey, how do you relate your testing metrics to the release metrics and acceptance?
Gotcha.
And yeah, so a lot of things in this diagram. We could spend all day talking about it, frankly. So the solution, there were at least concepts that were clearly identified right up front. If you look at the large numbers that are testing related.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the key bottlenecks now. And
yeah.
Yes, and the solution was where you started diving into that. How I was going to ask though, how did you decide on these bottlenecks? There's a lot of places. There's another spot where there's 20 days, but you circled two. You're like, oh, these are the ones we're going to focus on. How did that come to be?
So one of the tricks with this is, and of course it's experience as well, but you tend to look at a ratio where the ratio of the time over the total time. Those are the ones you want to address first. So these are if you do the ratio, that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck. Again, these are not absolute numbers. So your relative numbers are usually more important to look at, because keeping in mind that, they may not be absolutely accurate, but hopefully, relatively speaking, they're relatively accurate. So I tend to look at those ratios and those of, the time durations over the total time, and the biggest ones are the ones to focus on.
Gotcha. Very cool. So, well, when you're focusing on these, now this is still current, the current state, and you're going to say, I'm going to focus on these current states. You're going to do some, you're going to do some tactics basically to address those. So how do you think about these tactics? What do you get? So you're like, okay, I know the areas and I know the numbers I want to go put the finger on and scrutinize. How do I take the next step of that? Yeah,
so this is where, again, experience comes into play. A junior engineer would be thinking about all the software they might write to address these things, but in a value stream map, there's a lot more than just technical, software. There's tooling, there's process, there's people as well. Even re-architecting how, you address people with incentives, and all of these things need to be taken into account. That's why you need someone with a lot of experience to really figure out what is a good solution for to match the goals of the value stream. So under the people category, as I listed at the bottom here, leadership roles might even have to change, training programs, incentives, performance metrics, things of that nature. Under process, you want to really have metrics for each stage so that you start, figuring out how long things really do take, the process time, the lead time of every stage, and things that are happening within the stages as well. Set up some gates and triggers so that you can automatically, progress from one state to the next. And under technologies, what's the tool chain? Is it the most optimal tool chain, or at least are there tools that are slowing things down? Maybe they don't have a good API and require manual work in order to set them up or to run them. Packaging, patching, all of those things, have tools. You really want to be able to orchestrate the environments automatically and then automate the tasks automatically once orchestrated. So you really, this is where it all comes together. This is the magic, really, honestly. Someone that you need a leader that can point out the big picture changes that are required for each of the stages, especially the ones that have, the major bottlenecks.
Yeah.
Not just someone that is going to look at, hey, well, let's change this code or one particular tool or something.
Well, that really takes us to the, key tips. Here's the meat of this entire webinar is kind of these 5 bullet points, if you will. All that was to tell you this. So
yeah, basically.
What are the key tips that we should consider?
Well, just that, don't just look at the technology. Engineers tend to do that, but really you've got to look at holistically the people, process, and tech, and how those things all relate together, especially for those bottlenecked areas that are relevant to the goal. And don't try to go off on a tangent and solve all problems. Stick to the goal, right? And get something that you can measure.
Fix lead time. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And it may even be at the expense of other factors, but hopefully if you fix lead time, you're not going to blow up quality or efficiency or stability. That's why you do need an experienced leader that's going to think about, hey, wait a minute, we can't only do this even though we're fixing lead time.
Right.
We're going to have to, take into account some quality metrics as well, things like that, quality improvements. Consider the variables that are not just, on the table. If you do a telescopic or microscopic view of a bottleneck, you may miss the point, right? Sometimes in order to improve, let's say testing, you want to readdress the architecture of the system. So things like maybe there's a component of the system that if you were to separate it out, you could address it separately, manage it in parallel, and get some improvements to the bottleneck. So think at that level as well. Scaling, both horizontal and vertical scaling. Sometimes you can do more things in parallel, horizontally, or maybe if you just apply a more powerful system, you can do vertical scaling and improve the time something takes if it's a time-oriented goal.
Sure.
And look at the delays for setting up and tearing down an environment, in this case testing.
That's a big problem. I see. I mean, I see that all the time. The environments and the quality being the Achilles heel of trying to fix this, because if you don't have that, if you increase your frequency of whatever these pipelines are, you're going to next run into environments and quality, and it's going to just hit you every time.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Some of the solutions that you come up with may not be, they may be solutions that address multiple parts of the value stream. And if you look at the total amount of time that's being improved, then it becomes relevant. Whereas you might, I don't know, something, again, take test orchestration. Maybe test orchestration is a relatively small amount of the time, but you do it so often throughout the value stream, the total amount is so relevant, it's worth addressing that issue as a big item, because it's going to shorten the total time across the value stream. That's just an example. Yeah, I talked about this idea of ratios. Don't worry so much about the absolute values. The numbers you're going in with aren't absolutely accurate anyway, but
sure.
Hopefully the relative ratios are useful. and don't stop until you've actually done an estimate, of what the solution you're proposing will achieve. Again, these are not absolute, but try to backtrack after you've mapped out a solution and say, okay, if we really do this, what is it actually going to achieve? Do we really believe it or not?
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We better hustle along. There's a number of different kinds of things you could be solving for, and not to spend a lot of time on this, but because I want to make sure we have time for digging in the other one. But we talked about this on a previous webinar.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you can talk about some of the kinds of tricks that you did when you were trying to solve these things. You're trying to have 45 days and you're trying to bring it down to 10. So what did you do?
Yeah, so this is what the actual analysis was. I actually did come up with this for this particular client. So first of all, it was pretty clear that as you pointed out, the steps in their value stream were a little bit out of order compared to best practice. So rearranging the workflow was the first thing. And again, to do that require people, process, and tech changes. If people have to change the way they're working a little bit and what their expectations are and even who they interact with to do their work, and putting in place measures for each of those new stages for both dev and QA especially. The testing activities were, if you added up all the testing activities, including planning, the planning was outside the scope of the way the goal was defined, but still, it was a lot of effort. And by improving planning, you could accelerate the start of testing and therefore have an impact on the goal as well. So re-architecting testing into a continuous testing strategy where even the planning was, built into the front end, and you get a jump start on getting people involved rather than waiting until after the fact with big delay. They have to learn what they're supposed to do after you've already decided what they're going to do.
Right.
Yeah, that happens a lot, unfortunately.
Details, yeah. Details.
The test environment, clearly there was a lot of effort being spent manually to just set up a test environment and tear it down and trying to gather test tools and all the different parts of the system that's being tested, which was, I said, a large insurance application with legacy components and off-the-shelf components and as well as developed components. So putting all that in place in a more automated fashion would definitely be a huge way to save time. Putting in place an orchestration environment. Containers, containerizing the portions of the apps would help with that, to just be able to spin up containers faster than what they were doing with bare metal installations. The release criteria needed to be more refined so that everybody was focused on meeting the criteria rather than just doing testing without really having a clear goal. So that alone would speed things up when you really know what you're trying to get to. And then automating as many of the steps as possible, especially the approval stage was completely manual. So it was shown as fairly short, but in reality, when I dug into it, I found out it was sometimes taking a lot longer because just getting people in a room to approve things could take 2 weeks in that environment. So,
well,
yeah.
And all this wraps up into a future state map, which looks something like this.
Exactly. So this was like the end result of this particular client. The blue, the suggestions, and the red are the delays that would end up, and the timings are in the black at the top. So this solution did meet a 10-day budget. All of the things in blue require investment, and this presentation doesn't go into the cost of all of those things. But again, it's a large organization. There's a lot of changes required to accomplish this in a 6-month window. But if they're serious about getting to 10 days, then those are the things that are required, at least according to the solution. And the team did agree that this is a good solution for the goal. I'm not even, I haven't been involved through to the end, so I honestly can't say whether they've implemented this by now. But they were in progress when I was most recently involved implementing this. They had accepted the solution, and hopefully it's well underway.
How did you guys come up with the timings here? Because I mean, in some degree, these timings are like, I think it's,
Yeah, so again, they're not absolute timings. You have to relate it to experience, and people that are in the room will say, yeah, if we do it this way, then I can see why it's going to only take 1 day rather than 10 days or something. If you automate tests and parallel the tests, acceptance testing, for example, rather than having people waiting around to do manual to do manual acceptance testing, and then there's a huge difference. Testing is probably the single biggest bottleneck in most value streams.
Mm-hmm.
There was an article just a couple of days ago that was verifying that enterprises are under investing in test orchestration and automation. But yeah, that's basically it. It takes experience. There is no way to absolutely prove it's going to take that long, but
right.
At some point you have to trust the folks to say, yeah, if we do this, then this is the kind of result we're going to get. And then you measure it. You don't try to, get to 1 day. You produce a reasonable goal in a reasonable time frame. Measure it. Put in place the measures. See how far you get. Maybe you'll get to 5 days. Maybe it'll take 20 days. But at least you've measured it and you see what effects things have had, and you're going to keep on improving things and continue the journey. A lot of these full DevOps digital transformations, they don't happen in one jump.
Right.
They take multiple, not just sprints, but even epics. To get to a major, unicorn level of performance can take years. Is the truth, right?
I've yet to ever, unless you started off in the cloud, I've yet to see this ever, go. This is not a one jump thing. This is multiple iterations, and we should do this in an agile fashion. What a new concept. So when we get done with a future state value stream mapping exercise, what are our outputs? What do we have at the end of the day? What do we end up with?
So hopefully by now, with what I've said already, this is almost superfluous, but you end up with a map that everybody can look at and say, yeah, if we, this is what we agreed to accomplish as a big picture roadmap for our value stream. People are aligned around that. It addresses not only the technical aspects, but holistically, people, process, and tech. And there's an analysis that goes with it that says, this is why we think, we can accomplish the goals that we set out to accomplish with this particular solution. So it's kind of a checkpoint. Again, that analysis may not be absolute numbers, but it at least gives you an idea of what, compared to other situations, this is an improvement that we expect. It's a reasonable expectation if we do it right.
Yeah, for sure. And the part I've always found interesting is the kind of questions I get are, well, just give me a tool and I can draw this up and then I'm good to go, right? It's like, boy, if you have that mentality, just stop now because you're going the wrong direction. The goal is to get team alignment behind a continuous process of improvement where you're going to manage your value streams and the process of delivery and do improvement. The whole point of this exercise is to do better than we've been doing before. And here's a tried and true process that is a little bit, requires getting the team involved, but that's the point. The biggest challenge you'll find here isn't necessarily coming up with improvements. It's getting alignment with the team to make these changes. And this process will help you through it. So therefore, getting the future state visual map is that's probably the biggest thing you can say, because off of that, then you can point back to it and say, okay, different aspects of the team, make sure here's your portion of that project that we're going to take on over the next 3 to 6 months. We can now track our progress on that project, and then we can, once we get it all implemented, we can see did we work or not, and then rinse and repeat, whether we expand that out to other divisions or into the next iteration of getting closer to more of a pure continuous deployment kind of life cycle.
Yeah, I would point out that the value stream mapping, current state and future state, in and of themselves are not, if you like, complete. Or sufficient, I should say, for planning purposes. Usually these are inputs to a more extensive planning process. So I think in a prior webinar, we discussed the assessment process.
Yep.
And the assessment process has additional steps beyond the future state value stream map that actually goes into a deeper dive on the solution components and roadmap the solution into epics and user stories and tasks and actual costs and things, return on investment calculations and things of that nature. So I wouldn't want people to go away from this, webinar thinking that future state value stream mapping is sufficient for budget purposes, for example. It's really a good input to that process, but it's not sufficient in and of itself.
Yeah, and the point is this just needs to be part of the culture. Analyze what we're currently doing. I think of it from a finance point of view. Finance is typically saying, hey, whatever you're spending now, find a way to cut, X percentage out of your budget. We're going to invest in those areas that are more important. Why are we not doing the same kind of continuous improvement thinking with how we deliver and run our software factories? So if we do that, what's the process? Value stream mapping. You create a current state and a future state, and you continuously come back to reinvest and sharpen the saw, if you will, to make everything better. Whatever that chunk is that you can invest, great. But create a future state map, because then you've got you've got a business case for the level of investment that you ought to make. If truly velocity is all that matters, well, great. Now you've got a proposal for how much faster you could be if you were to invest in that as a project.
You make a good point. This whole exercise is not a one-time thing. You do a future state map for, if you like, the next big leg in your journey. But once you get closer to it, then you want to do it again for the next big leg in your journey. And it's an ongoing process of continuous improvement. That's why the third way of DevOps, as Gene Kim points out in his Phoenix project, is it's basically continuous experimentation and improvement. And this is a way you can do that in a systematic approach, an engineered approach, rather than just a haphazard experimentation.
Yep. I'm going to skip the survey question. I'm going to get to the end, and then we'll have a few minutes of questions. But again, I want to clarify something. Plutora is a value stream management platform, and people get this confused and think, so you do value stream mapping? Well, yeah, but the point, more of the question is, I want to know, how do I onboard and start doing value stream management? An interesting note, we were at Enterprise Summit, we sort of did an ad hoc survey of people, asked them what do they think about value stream management, who's doing value stream management, and what's the progress. And the results that we came up with was that, man, over half the people were already doing value stream management. They were managing their value streams. And we asked them what that was. They didn't know. They were just getting started and trying to figure it out. You have value streams flowing through your software factory now, and you need help basically seeing what's going on. You need help measuring the results and the process and enforcing the governance throughout all that. The aggregation of visibility into the pipelines that are there and governing the process and the metrics of delivery and being able to orchestrate across the tool chain, all of that is what is part of value stream management. Forrester created a wave for this, and we have that available on the Plutora website. Come to the website and you'll read all about it. There's a number of players in this space, of which Plutora is one of the leaders. And we're a strong believer in it, because the more you get into mapping your value streams, you're going to start to see the inefficiencies, and you'll start asking questions. It'll be like, hey, how long does it really take us to do this? Or what are my release processes? And as soon as you get into that kind of thinking, it's like, well, you're going to need some tooling along with the people and processes to help you down that journey. That's why we're here. A value stream management platform truly has to integrate into the entirety of your tool chain. It should integrate to all tools, and it should integrate regardless of whatever development methodology exists. Some of your pipelines ain't ever really going to get to be DevOpsy, and that's okay, because it's not worth the investment for the number of times they change. You're just going to put them to the side, but you're still going to have changes to them. Doesn't mean you don't still manage them. Well, that's what we do. We standardize across these pipelines and give you these metrics and delivery. We got about 6 minutes for questions, and there's one question that I want to answer that I get asked all the time, and then I'll send some of them to you, Mark. The question that I get asked all the time is, how do I get started doing value stream management? And the indicator to me there is that you haven't quite got what are value streams and what does it mean to manage them. There's so many different onboards here of looking at a value stream and saying, well, what are my environments? We just talked about environments being one of the critical Achilles heel of every pipeline. And what's my process of spinning up and spinning down environments is needed for deployment pipelines? If I improve that, that's part of the value stream. So managing my test environments is absolutely part of managing my value streams. That's value stream management. Plutора's got a solution for that. We can help you with that. In fact, that's probably the easiest onboarding you can do right now. Looking at my release trains and what are the process they go through from ideation all the way to production. That's part of the value streams themselves as well. And one of the more impactful sections where you can start looking at how long does it take us going from phase to phase? How can we shift left some of the inspections that are happening after the fact in that hardening phase and bringing them over? How do we make this work for autonomous teams? This is all the conversations we love to have. That's the point. So, Mark, any final thoughts? Otherwise, I'm going to start throwing some questions your way.
Oh, fire away. That's good.
There was a question about some of the metrics of value streams. For example, what's NVT, the non-value added time you had on the slide?
Oh, MVP is usually just things like wait time. So a good example.
I can go back there.
The time it takes to set up a test environment. Maybe you've requested it through a ticket or something. Please set up this test environment for me. So that's non-value time would be an example.
Kind of the handoffs between processes.
Yeah, so you're not actually executing anything, you're kind of waiting. That would be an NVT.
Gotcha.
Non-value time.
And the opposite of that is value time?
Well, yeah, process time.
Gotcha. Perfect. Is there a benefit of doing value stream mapping for legacy processes?
Well, sure. The question really comes down to, is there value in trying to make improvements to a system, right? And it comes down to a return on investment calculation. If that system is a legacy system and it never changes, then why the heck would you make improvements? Because it's going to cost money. So there are a set of, I have a checklist that I use to try to evaluate whether or not it makes sense to apply, anything, including value stream management, to any one system. Or if you have some choices of which system that you want to apply it to, then try to help pick out what's going to have the biggest bang for the buck. But sure, there are certainly lots of examples where legacy systems changing quite a lot, and it's costly, and mapping out the value stream can be valuable, and then attacking where the bottlenecks are, whether it's testing or delivery or packaging. You can get a lot of value out of that if it meets the criteria.
Yeah, we didn't talk about efficiency and some of the other calculations for future state. We did that in a prior webinar. I just want to acknowledge that there are calculations to be looked at here. The question was about efficiency. We didn't talk about it. It's like, yes, you're right. We didn't talk about it. Any comments on that, Mark?
Well, I categorize the goals, 6 kind of goals. I mentioned them in that big picture DevOps blueprint. There's agility, which includes goals like lead time. Efficiency is another one. I haven't provided an example of that in this webinar, but I do have other examples where you're really trying to drive down efficiency because your costs are out of control, or maybe these engineers are spending a lot of time doing non-value added work, churn, fixing bugs rather than creating new valued features, for example, getting interrupted a lot. So if you would do a value stream map for around efficiency, the measures are going to be different than just the lead time.
Sure.
You're going to be looking at efficiency measures, and the methodology applies exactly the same. It's just that the measures that you're looking at, and then the contribution bottlenecks and the discussion are going to be around, hey, how do we make this more efficient? How do we make it so that when we do something it counts, and that we do it fast, and that the cost of doing it is reasonable. So that's a different perspective on the whole value stream. but the same methodology applies.
Absolutely. Okay. I think we have run ourselves out of time, and we need to turn it over because there's some gift cards that have to get handed out, if I remember right. I think that's over to you, Mitch.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate having time to do that. Let's probably have a few folks hanging out wanting to find out what's going to happen. So let's do that right now. We have 3 winners that we're happy to announce. First is Alexander T, Michael R, and Shen O. So we'll be in contact with you to get those gift cards to you. So great. Looks like we're at the top of our hour. Marc, Jeff, thank you so much for putting on a fantastic webinar, sharing your expertise. Don't forget, Marc's book is available at engineeringdevops.com. We'd like to thank you for attending. Our listeners, participants, your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending it with us. It's been our pleasure being part of today's webinar. Have a great day and be careful out there.
Thank you.